premiering for the first time in the history of all of history a brand new show called What's in the News, hosted by your favorite host. That's me. Please give a big round of applause, everybody. For me, to encourage me. Thank you. I don't like the praise, by the way. Thank you. Thank you very much. US President Donald Trump to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan. So currently the US has as many as 14,000 troops in Afghanistan. And after what Donald Trump, the president, has said, they're going to withdraw as many as 7,000 troops. That is half as much troops from the Afghan soil. So a little bit of history regarding this news story would be that the US has had a 17-year conflict with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the fact remains that the Taliban still controls a vast majority of the land in Afghanistan. And there are still Afghan military casualties happening because of the Taliban attacks in Afghanistan. And the US is also apparently withdrawing all of its troops from Syria. That is what at least Donald Trump has said. We don't know if that will be executed to the fullest extent. So the Islamic State, the caliphate, has been destroyed for the most part in Syria, and as we see here, it is now confined to some narrow pockets in the Iraqi Syrian border. And I think it is not viable for the US. At least I think this is what Donald Trump thinks. He thinks probably that it is not viable for the US to waste its resources fighting a war that's not its own in the Middle East, But I think the rest of the White House probably thinks that the US needs to have a firm foot in Middle Eastern soil because of the oil and pun intended, and also because the US, it just wants to have a global influence. The US wants to have its own influence on global affairs. That's just how it's been for more or less the past 60 years. So as we saw, the US has been stranded in Afghanistan for 17 years and in Iraq for 15 years. So this has been going on for quite some time. The US military has had its bases for more than a decade now in Middle Eastern soil. So this situation is much more complicated than it seems at face value, because there are four main players when it comes to this news story. First, we have the US, and then we have Turkey, and then we have the Islamic State, and then we have the Kurdish people. So the US is supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria, and the Syrian Democratic Forces are basically a rebel group led by Kurdish rebels. And Turkey hates the Kurds because it sees them as an extension of the Kurdistan Workers' Party. And the Kurdistan Workers' Party has been fighting Turkish troops for decades. In the past, Turkey had attacked Kurds in some pockets on the other side of the Syrian border, but it is said that the US presence in Syria has largely mitigated those attacks by Turkey on the Kurdish rebels. And I read that the US presence has had a big role in the safety of the Kurdish people from being attacked by Turkey, obviously. So here's what could happen if the United States leaves Syria right now. Turkey and the Kurdish rebels could start fighting, and if the Kurdish people who have been fighting the Islamic State in Syria, for the most part it has been their effort, is what I've read. I've not been to Syria, so I don't know. So yeah, for the most part, the Kurdish people have been fighting the Islamic State, and for the most part, it has been them who has defeated the Islamic State with US support. So if the US leaves the scene now, Turkey could attack these Kurdish rebels, and if the Kurdish rebels become weak, it could empower the Islamic State once again. So that is the implication of the United States completely leaving Syria. But I think from the perspective of the Syrian citizens or the Afghani citizens or the Iraqi citizens, um, none of them probably wants the United States to be involved in the internal affairs of their country. I think a Syrian would probably think the United States is a foreign country. Why would the United States want what is good for me? And I think even perhaps this is just a guess, that even the soldiers of the United States Army, even they would only want to serve what's in the best interest of their own country, right? Why would a soldier from the United States Army care about the Syrian citizen? It just does not make sense to me. So maybe it is a good thing that the United States is finally leaving Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, but we still don't know what the complete implications of this are going to be. So I guess it's going to be pretty interesting. I wanted to cover this story in spite of the fact that this is really serious and a lot of people are going to be offended no matter what I say, but I still thought that I'd like to cover this because this has been going on from since I was a child, right? I watched the towers fall in 9/11 in the United States. I remember watching it on the TV here at home. So this whole terrorist thing and this whole radicalization of the masses in the Middle East and stuff like that, it's been going on for a long time. And maybe the US leaving the Middle East is a good sign. Maybe the Middle East can get back on its feet. Or maybe it can also be that the United States leaving Middle Eastern soil would be a disaster. We still don't know. So I guess we're just gonna have to wait and watch. But I thought this would be a pretty interesting story to cover. And in the midst of all this chaos, the U.S. Defense Secretary, Mr. Jim Mattis, quit his job, saying in a letter to the president that you have a right to a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours. So basically, Jim Mattis, the Defense Secretary, and the President of the United States had different opinions about this whole Middle Eastern debacle. And Mr. Jim Mattis decided that he had to quit his job because of his difference in opinion with the US president. And he also said, apparently in his letter, that Russia and China are countries that want to shape a world consistent with their authoritarian model. Now, I have not read Mr. Jim Mattis's letter, but this is what I read with regards to this story. So we still don't know how things are going to play out in the Middle East if the United States leaves Middle Eastern soil. We don't know what role Russia is going to play in Middle Eastern internal affairs, and we don't know how this is going to impact the oil economy, for example, and the whole economy of the entire world at large. So I thought this was a pretty interesting topic to cover, and I'd like to make this into a weekly series or a monthly series where I can just sit and talk about the news topics that interest me a lot. So this has been the first episode of WIN, that is what's in the news. If you like this video, leave a comment. If you'd like me to cover specific topics, you can leave a comment. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.